And as we leave the last resting place of Joseph Wilton behind, anyone that's visited St Paul's Cathedral, well, you'll have seen some of his work. Some of his work also exists in Westminster Abbey too. And I'm taking you to the grave of our next interesting and famous person. We have to walk past the grave of our rector / astronomer. Leaving the area of the old church and walking past the new church and round the back of it. And here we are, our next famous person's grave. And this is the grave of Vice-Admiral Robert Plampin, born in 1762, and he died on the 14th of February 1834 in Florence. His remains were sealed in lead and brought back home and buried here on the 17th of April 1834. And this man has some very interesting history and connections to him. So not only will you see an image of the Vice-Admiral himself, we'll look into some of his history, which we're going to do now. And here he is, the man himself, Vice-Admiral Robert Plampin. And this lovely little painting was painted in 1803 by an artist with the surname of Buck. Robert Plampin was born in 1762, the son of a Royal Navy officer, John Plampin, who we see here, of Chadacre Hall in Suffolk. So Vice-Admiral Plampin's birthplace, the family home, is still very much with us today. Here we see it in 2025. Here's another image of Vice-Admiral Robert Plampin himself. Intended for a career at sea, Plampin joined the Navy in 1775 at the age of 13. He served aboard HMS Renown under Captain Francis Banks off the coast of North America during the American Revolutionary War. Robert was a British Royal Navy officer during the late 18th and early 19th centuries, serving in the American Revolutionary War, the French Revolutionary Wars, and the Napoleonic Wars. And here is a list of the wars in which he served and the battles at which he saw service. American Revolutionary War, the Battle of Martinique, and the French Revolutionary Wars, the Siege of Willemstad and the Siege of Toulon, the Napoleonic Wars, the capture of Boulogne, and the Walcheren campaign. And here is an image of the Battle of Martinique, at which he distinguished himself. I've been able to find an extensive list of the ships on which he served throughout his long career, and have luckily been able to find portraits and drawings of quite a few of them. HMS Renown attended at the attack of Rhode Island on the 8th of December 1776, and this was painted by Irwin John Bevan. HMS Panther, HMS Sandwich, and here we see it in the moonlight battle of Cape St Vincent, the 16th of January 1780, painted by Francis Holman. HMS Grafton, HMS Brunswick, fighting the Achille and the Vengeur de Pupel simultaneously. So HMS Brunswick fought off 2 ships at the same time. He also distinguished himself in this service as well. HMS Lowestoft, HMS Courageux, and this is Sir Richard Strachan's action, the 4th of November 1805, and the Courageux is seen on the far right. I wasn't able to find images of all the ships he served on. There was a great number of them. HMS Gibraltar, and one of his main claims to fame, one being reportedly that he was a day late for the Battle of Trafalgar, and the other being that he was Napoleon Bonaparte's jailer on the island of Saint Helena. He is best known for his time as commander of the British colony of Saint Helena in the South Atlantic during the period when former Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte was imprisoned there. After a brief voyage to Java, disease spread aboard HMS Powerful, and Plampin himself was taken ill, returning to Britain to recuperate. Rejoining the service in 1809, Plampin commanded HMS Courageux at the disastrous Walcheren expedition, and in 1810 commanded the squadron at Basque Roads near Brest on HMS Gibraltar. In 1812 he was commanded of the 98-gun HMS Ocean at Toulon, and in 1814 was promoted to a rear admiral. In 1816, following the end of the wars, Plampin was appointed as commander of the Cape of Good Hope station. A part of Plampin's duties was to observe the former French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte. He was kept prisoner in a house on the island of Saint Helena, which we can see here, deep in the Atlantic Ocean. Plampin regularly visited his prisoner, and the two had numerous conversations together that were recorded by naval historian James Rolfe. During his time on the island of Saint Helena, he was accompanied by a lady called Fanny Milchel, described as his wife, though it was common knowledge they were not married. She was not received by Lady Low or members of the small island's nobility, and the local Anglican cleric made a point of criticising her from the pulpit. They eventually married in 1821, so Robert really married in later life, being 59 years old when he married Fanny, and she was a good deal younger than him. In 1825, Plampin was again recalled to service, commanding the Irish squadron based at Cork until 1828, by which time he had been made a Vice-Admiral. He retired to his country home near Wanstead and managed his estates in Essex. In his retirement, he enjoyed travelling to Europe, and it was on one such journey, on the 14th of February 1834, and the journey was to Florence, that Robert Plampin died in Florence at the age of 71 years, and here we see some images of Florence from the 1830s, as Robert Plampin would have known it. His remains were brought back to England and buried in the churchyard of St Mary the Virgin at Wanstead. And here we can see his burial entry. Vice-Admiral Robert Plampin died at Florence on the 14th of February 1834, and he was buried on April the 17th, aged 71 years. And the curate or vicar who wrote this entry out has made a note: buried in a new vault in the churchyard at the expense of his widow. Robert was survived by his wife Fanny, and she died in 1864, but the couple had no children together. And that is the interesting life, the journeys, the wars and adventures of Vice-Admiral Robert Plampin. And as we leave the grave of our Vice-Admiral behind, I'll take you to some graves in a minute that aren't of famous people, but they do have famous connections. But before we go there, I'll show you one that's interesting. Sadly, its inscription has long since worn away, but the shape of it is, well, it's macabre, put it that way. As I say, with the inscription long since worn away, this tombstone marks a brick vault burial, and the tombstone itself is shaped like a coffin. I've only ever seen that once before, a coffin shaped grave, and that's in Rye in East Sussex. And once upon a time this one would have had iron railings around them. Quite a few of the more prosperous people's graves did in this churchyard, and they were taken away during the war to melt down for the war effort, and vast numbers of which didn't get used. So that's our coffin shaped grave, and to take you to our ones of famous connections, shall we say, we have to head over that way, so you're going to join me there. And here we are. We've just come from over that way, and we are now at the grave of our person with a connection to a famous person, shall we say. And most of his inscription has gone, but what you can see on here is in loving memory of Isaac Sewell, S-E-W-E-L-L. And Isaac Sewell was a relation on the male side of the famous author Beatrix Potter, who wrote the Tales of Peter Rabbit. So that's our first one, and our next one is just up this way there, so you're going to join me there now. And here we are at our grave of the next person with famous connections, and he was an interesting man in his own right as well. This is the grave of Jabez Bunting Dimbleby, in loving memory of Jabez Bunting Dimbleby, journalist and biblical chronologist, who died March the 17th, 1907, in his 80th year. Also Sarah, his beloved wife, who died October the 25th, 1908, in her 76th year. Absent from the body, present with the Lord. And this man, you'll probably recognise the surname of Dimbleby. He's a relation of Richard and David Dimbleby, and they're known to have visited this grave in the past as well. So that was our next one with an interesting famous connection. So there is one thing on him that I've been able to find, no pictures unfortunately, but I'll show you that now, and then you'll be joining me for part 2. And Jabez Bunting Dimbleby, as I said, I can find no images of the man himself, but doing a little digging into him and his family, he was obviously named in honour of this man, Jabez Bunting, 13th of May 1779 to the 16th of June 1858. This man was a relative on Jabez Bunting Dimbleby's mother's side, and Jabez Bunting here was an English Wesleyan Methodist leader, and the most prominent Methodist after John Wesley's death in 1791. And Jabez Bunting Dimbleby himself, these are some of his works: The Appointed Time by Jabez Bunting Dimbleby, and All Past Time and Almanac for Jabez Bunting Dimbleby. These are a couple of the books that I was able to find online. And that concludes this part of the tour. You'll join me for the next video as we start part 2, which will be longer than my series 1 episodes. We'll be covering more graves in them. So join me for part 2 onwards, and part 3 is covering specifically warded graves. So if that's your thing, join me for the next episodes.